Best. His name is Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer. He's an astrologer. We're both astrologers, and we're here to talk astrology. How's it going, Watson? How are you?
Good. Pluto just ingressed into Aquarius for the second time
Hmm.
yesterday, and
Yep.
so we're kind of, we're dipping the toe in a little deeper into this whole new 20-year era. So
Mm.
kind of excited about that, also a little wary of that, but yeah, I rang in the ingress by watching a delightful film called Melancholia, which I didn't know that that's what it was going to be
Oh,
about.
oh,
Um,
right, right. Yeah, you you
you know,
you, you tweeted about this.
I did, because it felt like an omen, because Pluto ingressed into my seventh house and my wife's seventh house, and of course, like we randomly decide to watch the one movie that implausibly contains the themes of both the seventh weddings, but also Pluto disasters and apocalyptic scenarios. So I I was like, I hope this is not too much of an omen. How was your Pluto ingress into your seventh, Nick?
Yeah, well, I've been sick these last few days. I've been sleeping a lot these last few days. So yeah, I'm on the mend. I'm recovering. The last movie I watched, I've just out of nowhere become really interested in the spaghetti westerns of the 1960s, the films of Sergio Leone. I was always aware of them, and I'd seen sort of bits of them on TV. But at Christmas, our family got a nice big TV, and so I haven't had one for a while since I've been in Canada. So I've been sort of catching up on movies, and yeah, on a big screen like that, it's really great to watch these old Sergio Leone spaghetti westerns, and they're really great. I'm not a Western fan or anything like that, but just like the cinema of it. It's not so much the that I'm into, cowboys and guns and shooting and all
Right.
that. But it's just so beautiful. The cinematography, the music, the Lee Van Cleef, Clint Eastwood. I mean, great sort of, all these great faces that Leone would use, and all those close-ups, those famous. I mean, it's a meme, right? You see those memes of Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef, and getting
Right.
ready to, those standoffs and stuff like that. I mean, there's a lot of that in his movies. A lot of men staring hard at each other in these close-ups, but they're
Right.
really like, it's cinematically, it's really, really great. So for some reason, I've been into that, and yeah, he's a very
You can
interesting
you
filmmaker.
can see the kind of legacy of that in films like The Matrix, or
Oh yeah.
there's or certain Quentin Tarantino movies sort of have some of those
Oh, big time.
flares.
Big
Um,
time. And Leone in turn was inspired, as was, George Lucas, by the films of Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese filmmaker.
right.
Fistful of Dollars is basically a remake of a Kurosawa film. And Star Wars was inspired by
Oh
Kurosawa.
yeah, no, for sure.
So yeah, they're just that whole sort of history of cinema, and these really interesting auteurs that have worked over the years. Definitely some interesting horoscopes that we got to get into at some point.
Yeah, we could definitely. These are definitely the kind of conversations we get more into if you join our watch parties on Patreon, which actually
Exactly.
we'll be having our first watch party next Saturday. This
That's
Saturday, this
right.
coming
This
Saturday
coming
on
Saturday.
the 27th. We don't know exactly what we're going to watch yet. We will put a list of movies that our Patreon subscribers can vote on. So definitely join us on Patreon, consider supporting us, and consider joining our watch parties, where we will get together on um, over a live chat, and we'll be able to watch a movie at the same time, and then we'll be able to join up afterwards in a hangout area and chat about the movie and its astrological themes, etc. So that should be really fun. But
Today we're doing music.
today,
Today we're doing music.
today we're doing kind of a strange subject in a way. It's like, why would we talk about this person? But I actually think there's a really good reason to talk about Britney Spears.
Yes.
Um, Number one, she fairly recently released this memoir about her life, thus far, which has given a lot of her and sort of personal insights into developments that we so far just kind of had, no real knowledge of what her actual opinions were. And um, it also does sort of feel like the end of an era for Britney Spears. Not like that she won't have a future one, but I think especially when we look at her chart, we'll see why Pluto's ingress into Aquarius actually ends up kind of being a convenient sort of bookend to these past chapters of Britney
Mm.
Spears's life. And so, in a strange way, she ends up kind of being at least this sort of 2008 to 2024 chunk sort of seems to be like a chapter unto itself in her life, as we'll see. Um,
Yeah, it's got a really important sort of personal relationship to me and my evolution as a professional astrologer. In the early days, in the early 2000s, I was an aspiring pop astrologer, and so I wrote articles about movie stars and pop stars and things like that, astrology articles about them, and that was my focus more so than politics. I mean, I was gradually moving into politics, but I was far more of a pop culture astrologer. And in March of 2007, I gave a talk at the first Blast conference in Sedona, Arizona. You know, Chris and I and two friends of ours drove from Cumberland, Maryland to Sedona, Arizona for this conference, and
I was supposed to be there.
you were
I was
supposed to be there.
I was supposed to be there to actually give a speech, but I could not get out of my classes. And I remember giving my professor, I remember telling my professor, "Well, I'm actually been asked to speak at this conference," and he's like, "Really? What's it about?" I'm like,
Uh-oh.
history. And
Right,
he's like, "Really? I'd like to see what this is." And like, he was genuinely curious. He's like, "One of my students is speaking in a conference. What is this?" But I
right.
didn't want to tell him it's astrology, so that was actually the reason I didn't go.
Oh, well,
I think that
okay.
was, yeah, it was. Anyway, so yeah, I know
Well,
exactly the time period you're talking about.
right. So it's March of 2007, and I gave this talk on Venus and Mars synodic cycles at the conference. It's actually this talk is on YouTube. You can see the talk. I spoke about a number of different cultural figures, and I did talk about Britney because I had some interesting things to say about Venus retrograde. I had prepared this talk a few months earlier. And that's sort of an important context because in between the time that I made the slides for the talk, which would have been sort of very late 2006, um, Brittany's life she was just getting divorced. She had just had her second kid, but she had not yet sort of had what would happen in February of 2007, which we'll get into, when she sort of snapped, so to speak. She shaved her hair off. She attacked paparazzi with an umbrella. She became kind of well, I suppose at the something of a laughing stock in the moment. And so then I was giving this talk in March, and in my slideshow, I just had this one image of it was an image of Brittany with all these sort of calculus equations around her head, sort of like poking fun at the shallow pop star. I don't know. It was a meme.
Mhm.
It was just a meme that I put in the slide, and it got a big laugh from the audience. And obviously, that was part of the reason I put that image there originally, was to just get a laugh from the audience. Um, but it also suddenly, you can almost see in my body language on the video when I get the laugh that I'm suddenly in my mind going, what the hell am I doing? Like
Yeah,
I'm punching down here. This is no longer
yeah.
like a sort of a superficial pop star that
Gotta
I'm
say,
making fun of.
especially after reading, all right, for full disclosure, I didn't finish like the last couple chapters of the book. I just ran out of time. But I do feel very sympathetic, to Britney
Sure.
Spears. I feel like she really did get very badly treated.
Yeah, yeah,
um,
and
it
so and so in that, I was in that moment a part of that, and instantly realizing like this isn't what I got into astrology to do.
mhm,
Um, and from that moment, I sort of backed away from covering contemporary figures, because there I was commenting on the astrology of the moment, and here's this young woman. I mean, to me, still
very young,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, I was in my 30s, so I could call her a kid, even though she was in her 20s. But yeah, I suddenly I was like, okay, I don't really want to be talking about people who are still sort of struggling with their ongoing struggles of life. It's easier to write about people who are either very old or dead, and the whatever pain they've gone through has come and gone. And it's kind of like doing an autopsy. You only do them on dead bodies. You don't do them on the living. And so it was a whole sea change for me as an astrologer, not wanting to get involved in that sort of pop culture. It was the days of like Talk Soup and that kind of thing. Just sort of having a laugh at celebrities who are in trouble.
The
Which
superficial, those like celebrity blogs.
right.
Yeah.
So but I never would have wanted to do an episode about Britney, except that she has published this memoir, which I have read all the way through. Thank you very much. And it's brilliant. It's really, really good. It's really, I wasn't prepared for how strong it was. And it's an easy read. I read it in a day. But it's a really good book. But now that she's put her version of her story out, I feel like this is kind of a full circle moment for me to sort of come back and well, I don't know if righting wrongs is necessarily the way to put it, but to do a more responsible job with the astrology of her life. And of course, no matter who we talk about in astrology episode, it's always subjective to the subject. We're not talking about what I think of Brittany or what you think of Brittany. It's what Brittany thinks of Brittany's life. And so the book is really great if you're a Brittany stan, or if you're interested in her astrology. I highly recommend it. And so that's the source material largely for today's talk, apart from the fact that prior to the February 2007 unraveling, in her life, prior to that, I was keeping quite a detailed chart file on her, because these were the days of like MTV.com. You remember MTV.com had news, so you had really great news coverage of these celebrities in those days, in those late 90s, early aughts, when MTV was still doing that kind of thing. I have a really good file on the early part of her career. I've added a few charts to some of the later stuff, the things involving the conservatorship, the conservatorship.
Gotcha.
Well, we're gonna talk about her life. And I can already see we're getting some great comments. Chelsea Collins mentions her Venus Pluto square is rough. Yeah, believe me,
Yeah, I mean,
we'll be getting into that
yeah.
big time.
Right.
That's all over the place in her life, not just in the nativity, but in recurrence transits. And Ray Weathers saying this is when Perez Hilton blew up. Exactly. That was
Yeah, this
that
kind of
kind of culture. Yeah.
mean-spirited,
Exactly.
way
So
of
I was
treating these
I
people.
was sort of party to that. I feel
Right.
in that talk, I was dipping my toe a little bit in that Perez Hilton kind of thing. So that's the wrong I'm trying to right here with today's episode. And right. Laura has an interesting comment. One of the wildest things about Britney's situation is that it really reveals how these gossip columnists are there to keep celebs in line and how deep the hole goes. Yeah, you're telling me. The book is kind of a revelation. I mean, I don't know how much I learned that I didn't already know. I guess I did learn some things I didn't already know, but just to hear her side of the story behind a lot of things that I'd already known about, I think is a
Yeah, it
big
definitely put a
revelation.
different spin on things, and yeah, I definitely felt like she has sort of finally. You definitely get the sense that she's obviously like gone through a lot of like therapy and reflection on just everything.
Yeah,
She
yeah,
really, sort of reflects on this sort of like as well as an adult. It was so much of this stuff, happened when she was still just so young. Yeah, it's crazy. So let's
yeah.
take a look at a chart.
Okay, let's do this. Just a moment here. All right. And here we are. So this is Brittany's chart. The 2nd of December, 1981, 1:30 a.m. in Macomb, Mississippi. And yeah, what can we say at the outset here? It's a Libra rising ruled by Venus in the fourth, conjunct the South Node. That Venus gets this sharp square from Pluto in the first, as well as a trine from Mars in the 12th.
And it's in mutual reception with Saturn and Libra in the first house. And to
Yes,
me, that is such a clear access point to something really basic we could say about someone with this nativity, because you often look at the ruler of the ascendant to sort of figure out what area of life will be kind of a focus or effort. And you would also want to consider planets in the first house as something which is somehow central or pivotal in the person's life, because those planets are themselves going to be reaching the degree of the eastern horizon, are going to rise in this person's life. So immediately, because she's a night chart, we know that Saturn is this contrary to sect malefic about confinement and being under limitation. And because that's in the first house, we would know that this would be a person who would undergo experiences of being literally confined in some very basic respect. And because Venus and Saturn are in mutual reception, we know that the source of this Saturnian nature effect in her life, or force in her life, would probably come from her origins, her parents. That her parents would function in this very potentially malefic way because of Saturn's placement there. On the other hand, Venus, being the ruler of the ascendant, would certainly speak to someone who would have some of those gifts of Venus, especially because she was born at night. And of course, it was her parents who also facilitated, her early successes as a child star, basically. And So, on the one hand, they kind of helped her sort of nurture her talent and help get her into um, this sort of vaunted place in the entertainment industry. But at the same time, as we would see later, this was there was a lot that was very ugly about all of that behind the scenes, and that eventually this will become sort of public with this conservatorship. And so when I see this like interaction between like the most sort of blessed planet Venus in this sort of tense interaction with Saturn, the most malefic planet of the chart, I kind of get the idea of this chart reflecting a kind of caged songbird, where she is this kind of Venusian character who is under lock and key basically with this Saturn. And then the fact that it's conjunct Pluto just shows that that is taken to an even kind of greater extreme. And that's just by considering a couple of the sort of primary placements in her chart. We can suddenly start accessing this idea of like great benefits from parents, but also really confining and limiting and bad things may be associated with those people as well.
Yeah, I think the other thing about Saturn in Libra, and particularly when it's not in the sect in favor, is that Saturn in Libra is also about standards, having very high standards, and almost like elite standards. And I think what happened to Brittany is she was held to a much higher standard that most of us are held to, and therefore it took that much less. All she needed to do was go through. I mean, a lot of people get divorced and then go out for a few weekends drinking with friends. She didn't do anything that abnormal, but she was really held to this different standard than everyone else. And I think that also played a role in her, and what happened to her is that a lot of us could have behaved exactly the same way, and we wouldn't have had quite the same punitive response that she received.
Right. I think, and I don't think I should be the one talking about this, but she you can see based on the phase of Venus and when she was born that she would have been born shortly before Venus would have stationed retrograde in Aquarius, going back into Capricorn, which is the red 4.
She's a red 4. Yeah,
Yeah,
you can talk about it. I
yeah,
don't
she's a red.
I don't own
Uh,
Venus retrograde, Watson.
no, I know, I know. I figured, I
Yeah,
just wanted to make sure I got the number right. Yeah, so she's a red 4, which is important because we also know that like people who are born close to these Venus phases, especially the retrograde, or in the Venus retrograde, that they may be people who kind of, um, in some ways, challenge social consensus about how people should behave in some sense. And of course, because of the way that Britney Spears was initially sort of marketed, basically when she was only 17, when she was sort of marketed as being, this sort of wholesome, perfect virgin or something, and so when she would express sort of more sexuality through her music and her performance as she, was an adult, um, she, like you said again, was sort of held to this higher standard, but she was seen as somehow pushing a boundary of what was of what was acceptable, or
sure.
pushing a boundary of propriety. And then, of course, we can definitely see that by the time she is going into what can only, I think, we sort of now understand as like, a genuine mental health crisis, like
Mm.
in 2007, we can again see that there's this kind of way again that she sort of challenges sort of social consensus, or becomes kind of a central figure of these kinds of debates or something, in the culture about
Yeah.
propriety and performance.
Yeah, people born, especially women born in the red intervals close to Venus retrogrades, like she was. She was born 29 days before Venus stationed retrograde. They tend to be in positions of where yeah, some kind of standard is changed, or needs to be changed. There's a will to sort of push the envelope. Venus retrograde can be controversial and provocative, precisely for that reason, because it's an attempt to sort of change the social consensus, or toy with what the rules are, what's supposed to be polite or impolite, if you will. Social or antisocial. These are all sort of Venusian issues. So yeah, I mean, I still remember watching MTV and in 1998 or 99, I guess it was, when Baby Hit Me Baby One More Time came out, and she's dressed like a schoolgirl, and yet there's this sort of naughty but nice kind of duality that she's playing with, right in the intro video.
Well, and this sort of, it's kind of like this naughty, flirty sort of image, and then just
Right.
fast forward a couple years later to 2001, she comes out with like the "I Am a Slave for You" video, which is
Right,
just like
right,
extremely, just you can practically smell the pheromones coming off the screen. It's this
right.
very like sweaty, writhing,
Yeah,
kind of orgiastic, sort of kind of scene, and so it's very I think a lot of people, sort of even casual, sort of consumers of popular culture, sort of recognize that as kind of a breakthrough moment for this definite like adult shift in term, which is perfectly expected and accepted in some ways, because she was an adult. She didn't have to,
yeah, yeah,
there was kind of this unfair expectation. And it's not just Britney Spears, so obviously this happens to a lot of artists, where they're kind of they continually hear this sort of concern from people like, what about the children? Well, it's not for them.
sure,
Don't let
yeah.
them watch it if you don't want them to see it. um
Yeah,
but
well, I mean, I think it was still relatively tame compared to,
yeah.
say, Prince. I mean, Prince was controversial as well. I mean, he literally had an album called Controversy. But there is still, let's face it, men could get away with certain things
Oh,
that young
that's
women
still the
can't.
case,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
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 I mean, that's still the case. When Cardi B, comes out with WAP, like that just made people's, head spin. But like,
yeah. Put on any
there's
hip
like
hop record
decades
yeah,
of
yeah,
men
right.
being exactly, like this in the same way. So it's just, I feel like, yeah, women artists especially run into the same kind of issue over and over again of these yeah
Yeah.
different expectations.
Again, it's that's I mean, in Britney's case, it's that Saturn and Libra, that the whole idea of
Right.
standards, having very high standards, being held to some, standard that others aren't held to.
Well,
Uh,
and she says that so many times in the book, especially during the conservatorship, that she there's one point at which she's talking about her time in Vegas and how she thought it was so ridiculous that everyone else involved with the production and stuff would get to go out and have drinks and stuff after the
right,
performances, and she's like, I'm in Sin City and I'm not allowed to sin.
right,
Like,
right.
this is not, she couldn't do just the ordinary things that people could do, all because of these extreme decisions that were made when she was at the lowest point in her life and needed help, not punishment.
Yeah,
So it just so immediately, that just looking, you can see how much you can get from someone's chart, even just from looking at something really, really basic about that chart, like Venus. And because she was born so close to the Venus retrograde, we know that we could probably guess then that Venus retrograde is probably going to be an important timer in her life for many kinds of things, and that is the case.
yeah.
um
The other aspect she has in her chart is the Mars Neptune square. Let me just check here. Oops. There we are. She also has Mars in Virgo in the 12th square, Neptune in Sagittarius in the third. And this is another one that we see sort of come up in recurrence transits in her life. So there's these two sort of rough squares involving
mhm,
her sect planets and outer planets. She's also born very, very close to the Uranus ingress into Sagittarius.
mhm.
And you're going to see that early part of her career, the hit me baby one more time period, is when Pluto is going to be conjunct her sun. And talk about that whole sort of innocence and versus adult sexuality sort of binary that sort of plays right in there. Um,
Right.
yeah, it really sort of on the nose, if you will. So with that in mind, I'm going to open up the file. This is my Brittany Spears file. Where do you think we should start, Watson? We haven't really decided. We have a bunch of different angles we want to cover. Um, should
Well, maybe maybe we could, we could either go by Venus retrograde to Venus retrograde, or if you wanted to focus on some of the recurrences of the Mars Neptune square, just to show what that sort of means in her life in a sense.
Yeah, let's just look. Let's take a quick look at these recurrence transits in her life.
Yeah.
So this is a file. If I'd had more time, like I said, I've been sick this week. I would have filled in more of her Vegas years, which would fall in here, and that would have been
Mhm.
interesting. Some of her later album releases. So I do regret I don't have a more complete timeline after 2008 than I should, and that's on me. But
There's still a few things that we can say about that time,
oh yeah,
from
yeah,
on
for
other
sure.
notes, but yeah.
So let's just look at Venus square Pluto, and then we'll do the other one. So Venus square Pluto, which she has in her chart natally, like at a 1-degree orb. I'm going to do a search with an 8-degree orb just to make sure we get anything that's relatively close. And boom, right off the bat, we get quite a bit here. First of all, it's interesting. Speaking of Justin is 11 months older or 10 months older than Brittany, but he also has Pluto square Venus at the same degree as Brittany's Venus, 25
Yeah.
Capricorn. And Brittany, of course, also has that square. Um, so yeah, going right like her earliest appearances on the Teen Choice Awards. This is right when Hit Me Baby One More Time comes out, and she's on the Teen Choice Awards while Venus retrograde square Pluto's retrograde, and you can see that Pluto's coming up to her sun. Oops, I Did It Again. The video shoot was done as Venus was approaching another square to Pluto. She got a head injury. There's this thing that she played these concerts in Mexico City during a Pluto Venus square. And these shows she talks about in the book how um, her she was on the way to the stadium, and her motorcade or whatever was held up by some gangsters, and there was kind of a standoff, and she wasn't sure if they would make it out. She was with her bodyguards, but
Mhm.
they were sort of surrounded by gunmen. Something hairy went down at that point. Um, and yeah, but then when we get to February 2007, this is where you really see the Venus Pluto come alive. There was her assistant wrote an email sort of talking about her trouble. She went into rehab February 14th as the square was intensifying, and then things really snapped on February 16th as the square is about 4 degrees apart. She went into a hair salon and shaved her head, in front of all these people. I mean, do you remember this? It was a big
Yeah,
deal.
yeah. Right, it was
This
yeah.
was the moment when everyone was like, "Oh, okay, something's really wrong here." Um,
Yeah, she was 25 years old at this point, so she was in a Scorpio perfection year, and so it highlighted her Mars in the 12th house of, like, mental health difficulties, and we can see that on that day, Mars was conjunct her natal Venus, and
right,
Venus was simultaneously opposed to her natal Mars. So, she had this like double activation of the ruler of the year, which was highlighting this malefic planet in the 12th house. Even though
oh,
Mars is of,
I'm just going
even
to
though,
put up what you're talking about.
yeah,
Yeah.
even though Mars is of the sect in favor in her chart, it still seems to behave pretty not great. Because Mars is the ruler of her seventh house, right, of relationships, and so
Hmm.
having the ruler of the seventh and the 12th could show a tendency for uh like one's relationship partners to become sort of adversarial, and time again that sort of and that's shown up in really huge ways, obviously, um and some in lesser ways, but it basically tells us that that her experiences with relationships would likely be not good, or you know um, be
Right.
marked by betrayals, and things of the 12th house natures. The 12th is the house of enemies, and so we can kind of see how both of those things can come into play as we look at other Mars returns and things like that. But yeah, you can see she's in a Mars ruled year with these simultaneous transits of Mars.
Right. And so as that month progressed, so she shaved her head, and the square's getting stronger, and then she wears a platinum wig a couple of nights later, and then another famous incident a few days later on the 21st, as the square's just passing, is when she attacked some paparazzi with an umbrella, and that's like sort of another iconic sort of image from this period.
Right.
So yeah,
The
this is February 21st. The talk I gave in Sedona was March 31st. So you can see like how it was right after all this was happening that I gave the talk, and I think I hadn't really thought about the sort of the shift, if you will,
Mhm.
until I was on that stage.
Yeah, if you go to if you shift the transits forward to September 9th, 2007,
Mhm,
so this is now getting into the red 5, the Venus retrograde in Virgo to Leo of 2007.
mhm.
That was when she gave that's when she did this universally panned performance at the VMAs.
I remember that
And
because she
well,
she she
you hear
wasn't.
her side of it.
Yeah, yeah.
She
No,
was having a panic attack. Like, she was
yeah.
not okay at all. She should
Did you
not have been
did
put
you
on
say
stage.
September 5th, was it?
No, um, I have for that, September 9th,
September 9th.
2007.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah,
And
Sunday.
so this is also just like a few days after she had released the Gimme More, which was the lead single for the Blackout album. And at the beginning of that month of August 2007 was when the divorce from Kevin Federline had been finalized. So we can see that this is interesting because it shows us the connection between 1999 versus 2007.
Right, right.
Venus went retrograde in the same part of her chart, and she she is, on the one hand, it was about like her ascent, during the previous one, and in
Right.
this time, it's like the end of that period of grace and goodwill from the public, and really receiving just, yeah, the brunt of people's mockery, and she. Not when you hear her perspective on this as well. I think this is the same award ceremony where like Sarah Silverman made these really brutal jokes about
Yep.
her, and
Right.
she was very upset about this because not only was it personally hurtful, but like she was in the middle of this like custody case with her ex-husband. Not a good look,
Nope.
to be kind of making light or fun of, not that she was the one doing it, but just not good, for all these jokes
Mm.
to be made at, the expense of her ex-husband. And so it just, terrible. Like
And
just
and and let's just point to this, because here you go, folks. If you didn't know about sect, if you didn't know about diurnal and nocturnal charts, you would be sure that someone with a Sagittarius sun having Jupiter conjunct their sun, that this should be some kind of great day, that it should be filled with confidence, and the person should be warmly received and appreciated.
right.
And like it's quite the opposite, I'd say. Yeah, she was it was devastating. It was really, but I mean, definitely at this point I was certainly thinking like she should not be on that stage right now. Like she was just
Right.
too vulnerable, and she was obviously being thrust out there,
Yeah.
against her will, really.
I just want to respond very briefly. Someone saying on YouTube, "Is this how men spend their Sundays talking about the astrology of Britney Spears? Why are you talking about Britney Spears? Is so random." We actually have been teasing that we're going to be talking about Britney Spears for the past few months. There was one of the figures we had previously agreed on talking about. We had talked about Napoleon in an earlier one. We're talking about Britney Spears today. So that's this was a long time coming. We just finally got to it today. But
Yeah,
is
I, I'm
another yeah,
yeah, we're not going to be doing that many pop stars. We
right.
explained at the beginning. If you came in late, we're number one. She's released a memoir. I don't usually want to talk about contemporary
Yeah,
figures
I feel like we
because,
kind of explained that pretty
yeah,
well
we
at the
did
beginning,
explain,
but,
but people come in late and then they're like,
yeah, so
they
why are
start
you
asking
obsessing
questions.
with Britney Spears? Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
why, yeah, yeah. I don't
it's
start
the
the
astrology that's
Yeah.
interesting
We
here,
explained all that. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look,
So
if you're not interested in Brittany, come check us out in 2 weeks, and we'll be talking about someone else we don't know yet, but it'll always be, our last subject was Napoleon, so we deliberately pivoted to something completely
completely different.
incongruent to
Yeah.
Napoleon, and we will pivot again to someone who's
Someone else, yeah.
is someone who's also sort of incongruent to Brittany. We want to be varied like that. We're going to be covering, film directors, actors, all kinds of political figures. So yeah, I mean, this week we're doing Brittany. That's that. No
Yeah.
reason why not. We're not snobs. Or well, I'm a bit of a snob, but not too much of a snob to talk about our
Mhm.
astrology.
Yeah, sure.
All right.
Um, so
The oh, did we Sorry, did I cut you off from something? I
oh,
forget
no.
who was saying what when you
Oh,
wanted to pivot to the other
well,
thing.
all right. So basically, I was just showing how I was just explaining how the Venus retrograde of 2007 that kind of followed the low
Yeah.
point, is it, was critical because it was like the finalization of the divorce from Kevin Federline, and really that whole story of Kevin Federline is very marked by the Sun Venus alignments. Do you
Oh,
have
yeah.
some events there for her? So like
Yeah.
in um I mean, we might be doing this a little out of order, but since we're on the topic of Federline, I think it's just useful to point out the chronology of that and how well that um, maps onto the path of Venus. So it was in 2004 when Venus went retrograde in 2004, the so-called Red 3. She had it was like in the lead up to that retrograde where she was spotted dancing with
Right.
Kevin
There we are.
Federline,
Yeah.
and then she got this injury, and like during the injury, he like
Let
cared
me
for
catch up
her, and
let me catch up with you here.
yeah,
Hold on, let me catch up with you. There she is. Federline. Okay.
yeah.
All right, keep going.
So this is in the midst of the red 3. This is like in the lead up to Venus stationing retrograde in Gemini. And just a little later, she would have the knee injury, and he was gonna like take care of her during this time. In the book, she says about how she felt like he really sort of cared for her and held her, and that she just sort of wanted to be like protected. And like that's kind of how she, it seems like she sort of fell in love, with this guy.
Right.
And then um in at the uh they get married a little later in 2005, is that right? September of 2005.
Where do I have her here? Yeah, here she is. September 2004.
Yeah. All right. Oh, September 2004. Pardon me. So it's just a few months later. Throw up those
Yeah,
transits. So check it out. The ruler of her seventh house is Mars, and here we have a Sun Mars conjunction occurring
very
on
close to her natal Mars.
to her natal Mars. So while you get a Mars return every 2 years, roughly, that's not always going to be it's not always going to be a Mars conjunction with the sun. It's not always going to be a Mars retrograde. So she did get married to someone when she had like a very special type of Mars return, which in her case is the ruler of her seventh house. So I thought that was
Yeah,
pretty interesting.
yeah.
Um,
The Sun Mars conjunctions in Virgo only happen once every 15 to 17 years. So even for someone her age, it's a transit that she might have only experienced maybe twice in her whole life at this point.
right.
And even by the time you're 40, it's maybe happened 3 or 4 times at the most.
Right. And the other interesting thing about this is that on April 19th, 2004, there was a solar eclipse at 29 degrees of Aries, which would be her seventh house. It's the only clue
Just a
we
couple of
really
days
get.
after she first went dancing with him.
Yes, exactly.
Right, right,
So you can
right.
see there was a solar eclipse at the last degree
Yeah,
of her
like
seventh
3
houses.
days later, you can see
Yeah,
that
it's
we're just
it's
in
really
there.
the only clue that we really get that like a marriage would be kind of
Mhm,
on the cards basically.
right.
But it is true then that yeah, just a few months later, she actually would get married, and it would happen at this very special return of the seventh house ruler. So I really love this example because it shows how the rulerships really do work, because we wouldn't have a reason to think that a Mars return in the 12th house would be significant for relationships unless Mars did have a connection to the seventh house relationships via rulership. Um, so
Yeah. The
um,
the other thing I would say about these Venus retrogrades, like we pointed to the red 5 in 1999 and 2007, which sort of bookend her ascent and her descent, if you will. And that's the Venus retrograde that goes opposite her sect light in
mhm.
Aquarius. But then this one, the Venus retrograde in Gemini, which would cover it was just getting ready to go retrograde when she started dating Kevin, and she marries him by the time it's over. And this is the Venus retrograde that does the opposition to her natal sun.
Yeah,
So
it may
these are
yeah,
yeah, these are very. And then by the time she marries Kevin, that Venus retrograde is moved back into opposition to her moon with the Neptune here. Remember,
yeah.
she's yeah, this is sort of emblematic um of the kind of situation she was in with this wedding.
Yes. So then, um, they have 2 children together, and I believe the next, like, Sun-Venus alignment would have been the blue one in, the spring
2005.
of 2005, right? That's the
Yep.
one where we met.
We met.
Um,
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
we met during that one. And
I don't have anything. What I have is in May of 2005 is when the chaotic reality show
yeah.
with Federline is broadcast. So it was probably being taped, I think, leading up to this, right?
Right. Well, when would her first child have been
Um,
conceived?
the first, the older child is where are they? Where are they?
Born
Where are
in
they?
2005.
There he is. Born in September
Yeah.
2005, so
So
probably
January
conceived in January, right?
So January 2005. So that would be like right around that 73-day stretch from the Sun Venus alignment in Aries, which would have happened in her seventh house. And we can see that because the node's moving further back through Aries, that there would have continued to be eclipses
Yeah.
occurring
Let me
in
find
that
my
part
way
of her
there on the
chart.
let me find my way there on the clock.
Mhm.
Speaking of chaotic, this isn't nearly as organized as our Napoleon list.
Now, keep in
Um,
mind too.
yeah, so here we are. Yeah, this is very close to let's find the eclipse here. There's the conjunction.
Mhm.
And this really was when we met, right? We met
Yeah,
probably I
yeah,
think
we
the last week of March is what I suspect,
mhm,
something like that.
yeah.
Yeah, so
Um,
this is that eclipse in her eclipse with a Sun Venus conjunction in her seventh house. Um, when she's probably about 3 months pregnant at this point.
yeah, it another thing that I think is quite interesting about the fact that these eclipses began happening in the 7th house and she got involved with this guy is because the you know and she spoke about this too, and she wrote about this in her book that uh for whatever reason, people were not terribly supportive of her marriage to this guy, which is another way we might be able to see the ruler of the seventh being in the 12th. Like, her partner is someone who kind of isn't as well liked, say,
Right.
as she is. And this is interesting as well if we compare the fact that Jupiter was transiting through Cancer in like 2001 when she was like at this really big height of her sort of
Hmm.
fame, but now she's having Saturn go through this place, and this is a time where like her sort of public image or status or reputation is kind of going through, another
Scrutiny.
sort of,
Yeah,
shadowed
yeah, yeah.
period. So that's kind of all square, the stuff happening in the seventh house.
Mhm.
But then in we get to the next alignment would be the red five, sorry, the red four
Yeah,
in at the end of 2005 going into 2006. And I think you have a few events for that.
I
Um
believe I do.
Involving the paparazzi. So
Yes,
she had so Venus went retrograde in Capricorn. Now remember, this is the same Venus retrograde that Britney Spears
was
herself
born
was
under.
born under.
Hmm.
So it's relevant because in this time frame, she had a newborn, like her first child. She also conceived her second child during this same retrograde, and her husband at the time, Kevin Federline, was trying to get his career off the ground, and we see her kind of struggling with the children by herself. She gets some unflattering photographs of her with her children, people trying to characterize her as being like a bad
Well,
mother. And
what happened? She talks about this in the book. So this is
yeah,
February 6, 2006. Venus is gestation direct in Capricorn. In this red four interval that we're talking about, and she's trying to get away from the paparazzi, and she sort of drives away with the baby in her lap. And they take pictures of this, and so then she's being called the terrible mother. But it's really kind of the situation. Like, she was just trying to get away from these people. The harassment was I mean, again, this was barely not even a decade after Princess Di had been killed running away from paparazzi. And this was the yeah, like someone mentioned Perez Hilton earlier. This was the peak of American paparazzi, harassment of celebrities. I don't think anyone, got it quite as bad as Britney did. And she was just more vulnerable than, say, someone like Madonna, who had dealt with it to some extent, but was older and more sort of in charge of her life,
right.
when she had to face the same kind of
Well,
things.
and who came to her, aid. I mean, Madonna was. She mentions Madonna.
Sure.
Did try to kind of be a kind of mentor to her and stuff. So that's interesting. You brought her up. Um, Now, the other kind of interesting way this connects back to a previous retrograde is that we know that when Venus went retrograde in from Aquarius to Capricorn back in 1998, that we were able to figure out that that was actually when she went into the studio to record do the first recordings for her
Her first
debut
album.
album.
Yeah.
Um,
Whoops, that's not the
and
one. It's this one.
So again, we see this kind of connection in time between like this series of Venus retrogrades in the late 90s versus the same Venus retrogrades at the time when her her goodwill, I guess, with the public, was on this case in a rise, and in the subsequent iterations of these same phases of Venus, undergoes this kind of dramatic reversal, it's almost like Venus was granting kind of 8 years of good favor starting from this point,
Mhm.
and then
Which would
as
abruptly be cut off from
yeah, cuts
henceforth.
off once they sort of complete. They reach these completion points, and then it's like over, at least for a while, perhaps to be restarted at some future time. But um, I thought I think it's really quite dramatic that in 1997 like a pop star is being cooked, like an internationally successful, top of her field pop star, and then by the next one she's struggling with two children, one inside of her, one she's holding, and and being hounded by paparazzi, and just generally having a bad time.
And
um
Jupiter is never doing her any favors. It's really interesting. Jupiter is never doing, SFA for her. you know,
I
uh,
mean,
I like.
Jupiter has sometimes been good to her. I mean, she's got married a couple of times while Jupiter's been in her seventh house.
Yeah.
Jana asks me, "Is the ruler of the seventh in the 12th
Yeah.
always bad?" I
N-
mean,
Not
depends, but
depends.
generally, it's not what you'd want or hope to see.
Look,
But I think,
the thing, let's put it this way. The 12th house is sort of feral and wild. So it's not necessarily bad, but it's sort of unstructured, undomesticated, and yeah, just sort of unmanageable in a way. That can suit some people fine if other things in the horoscope balance it out. So some of it comes down to a sort of a subjective perspective. But it definitely, when you're talking about marriage, which is a contract and an agreement and an arrangement, and involves a lot of trust, the 12th house is a place where, yeah, not a lot of trust can be found. It's wild, it's untamed, and so it's not a place for a sort of sober, concentrated contracts like that.
yeah, I mean,
But then
keep
again,
in mind,
you want to
yeah.
look at the ruler of the ruler of the 12th, which is this Mercury under the beams in Sagittarius. So it's not a very strong Mercury. Look, if she had a different chart and she had a Mercury in a much stronger position, maybe that 12th house isn't as debilitated as it is in her case.
I mean, to me, her ruler of the 12 being Mercury in Sagittarius with Uranus kind of makes me think of like bloggers, journalists, medias. Well, the paparazzi, they're on
Yeah.
the move, and they are, trying to get their pound of flesh from you.
And it's a Mercury that's under the beams. It's opposite its own domicile, and it's a morning, like it's a rising Mercury. So I can't call it a morning star because it's under the beams, but it's contrary to the sect. It's not even on her side. So it's
Right.
it's it's just not a very strong Mercury, and I think
I would
that's what makes it a harder thing to have the ruler of the seventh and the 12th.
Well, and I think if we talk about the Justin Timberlake story, I think that kind of makes it also pretty clear that, like, yeah, having the ruler of the seventh and the 12th, at least in her case, is not great, because she, well, if you know anything about that story, like she
Right.
was with this person, and then this person like takes kind of like revenge against her in like song format, and like the song isn't just any song, it's like extremely
Crimea
popular,
River. Right.
yeah, song. It's yeah, I would say another maybe more positive way you could look at the ruler of the seventh house being in the 12th would be that you maybe encounter your relationships in maybe you meet your relationship partner in when they're in a kind of deep dark place themselves,
Mhm.
because the 12th can represent places of abandonment or figures who are estranged. So it could be like meeting someone at the lowest point of their life, but that's how your connection with them sort of begins, is that they are in kind of dire straits, or
And the other thing
need
is, I mean,
rehabilitation, something like that.
right. I mean, the other thing is, okay, like her third husband, Samasgani, has some sort of his own celebrity. Not very, I mean, not nowhere near Britney Spears level, but her previous two husbands are from, to for want of a better term, they're from a different sort of social class than her. Which again sort of plays into the 6/12 axis of hierarchies, and the your so-called your superiors or your inferiors or what have you. And I think that's another sort of facet of the Mars in the 12th is, um she's not like, it's not like Madonna, who like was with Sean Penn and then Warren Beatty, and like Guy Ritchie, like
Well,
people
if
people who,
Madonna's to be believed, Sean Penn was kind of bad
well, no, he's
to
bad. No,
Madonna.
he's. I'm not talking about
Oh,
whether he's bad or not. I'm talking
okay.
about, like, Sean Penn was a movie star in his own right.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
He had his own clout. He didn't need to like marry Madonna to boost his career
Right,
in any way,
right,
shape, or form. Whereas Kevin Federline, I think, clearly, did. I mean, he may or may not have loved her. I'm not going to try to read his mind, but
right.
clearly he was
He needed
using
her.
he was using her, for his own sort of career advancement,
Well,
and
and
that's
one
what
could
that's what
say
I'm
the
getting
same
at here.
thing. Yeah, one could say the same thing about Justin Timberlake as well. I mean, not that he necessarily needed Britney to be famous, but he did kind of use his association with her to drive his own,
Sure.
career, especially in the aftermath of their breakup. And the astrology of that is really fascinating. Um, the I would also say that even her more healthy seeming relationship with Jason Trewicki, who was her former manager, ended up kind of becoming tainted because he ended up being appointed as like a co-conservator along with her father.
Right. Right.
Um,
That's
and
no good. Yeah.
That's not good. And um, so
Speaking,
it's
just I
yeah,
wanted to come back to Justin here. I've got this bi-wheel here. This is when Britney and NSYNC start touring together in late '98. So she's just out of, she's just becoming famous, or she's just about to become famous, really.
right.
And she's touring with NSYNC, and she knew
You want to
Justin
show
from.
you want to put the chart up?
I have the chart up. Am I
Oh, I
not
don't
showing
see
it?
it. Nope.
Oh, don't. Okay. That's one of those again. Good old Nick, not realizing he's not sharing the chart. Okay. Sorry, folks.
um,
So here we are. I have this chart here. This is, so she's not yet 17. She's like 2 weeks from turning 17, and she goes on tour with NSYNC. She's not famous yet, but they're both blowing up. NSYNC and Britney are just like becoming stars in this moment, and she's having a Mars return. So speaking of Justin, this whole thing
yeah,
that you're saying about Justin, this
exactly.
is this is likely, I mean, maybe not the very day, but this is around when she and Justin would have been getting involved. They did know each other from the Mickey Mouse Club. They'd known
Yeah,
each other for 5 years at this point, but
yeah.
this is when they're starting to become a couple, and you can see it
Well,
happens on this
and
return.
according to Justin Timberlake himself, he said it back in an interview in like 2006 that he always had a big infatuation with Britney ever since he met her. And I guess Britney Spears in the book says that they did kiss like after they met, like sometime when they were still very young, like for as a dare, in like
Right.
a truth or dare type game. Um, but they didn't actually get together like as a couple really until after like till late 1998 when she joined the NSYNC tour, which was right around that date in 1998. And this is interesting because if you look at the phase of Venus, we're in a blue
Two.
two. We're in a blue two. So that was a Sun Venus conjunction in Scorpio. So we know that 4 years later, in November 2002, there would be a Venus retrograde in Scorpio. And what happens then? In in October 2002, that's when Justin Timberlake releases
Crimea River.
Crimea River,
Yeah.
because at the very beginning of the year, in January 2002, which was the blue 4, when the sun was conjunct Venus in Capricorn, um, that was close to the time that she broke up. And actually, Brittany does admit in the book that she kissed Wade Robson, and I guess somehow Justin Timberlake found out, and so he broke up with her. By March, the reports were sort of public that they had broken up, and Britney Spears seems to have taken the breakup with Timberlake way, way harder than I think seemed apparent from the outside. Like, she said she was still like recovering from that, 2 years later. But it also makes sense because he kind of, Justin Timberlake really, well, you can read the book, for the details. But
I want to something else about this period, that because we were talking about recurrence transits, and the other one we didn't look at, and it comes into play here. And speaking of this Mars of hers, she has Mars square Neptune in her chart. And this is really interesting when it comes to the whole Justin thing. We get a lot of Mars square Neptune stuff in her timeline. For starters, she signed a record contract when there was a it was approaching Mars Neptune. Yeah, it's Mars Neptune square there. Baby One More Time was released during a Mars Neptune square, or as it was applying. I know I'm using a somewhat wide orb there, but the really interesting thing, when in January of '99, so 2 months into that tour, MTV is saying that both Britney and Justin are denying a romance rumor to MTV. So you see Mars at 28 Libra, approaching just about to square Neptune at 1 Aquarius. The sun was when this report came out, and then like later. 3 years later, also during a Mars Neptune square, they're denying that they've split. So they denied that they were a couple during a Mars Neptune square, and they denied that they were breaking up during a Mars Neptune square. So I find that pretty interesting as
and you have to consider why. At the time, Britney Spears was trying to cultivate a certain image, and if she even kind of says this in the book, something more along the lines of, we'd already been we were already living together, but we had to kind of protect this like marketed image of herself as like not being like attached to anyone. And we can see Saturn was transiting through Aries at that time. So that's another way we might be able to say that she was, because Saturn would be transiting through her 7th house. And so it's kind of interesting. Like, she was in a relationship with someone, a fairly serious one, and wasn't able to be very open about that, and had to kind of keep it sort of secret in a way. And
this is something that's happened to pop stars over the ages. John Lennon was married just before the Beatles broke big, and he kept his marriage secret for as long as he could when Beatlemania was happening. It's something that pop stars sometimes have to do to maintain an image. And it's interesting to me that Mars Neptune square is in place, like whenever they're denying either that they're a couple or they're denying that they're up.
And just so everyone understands the significance of the Crimea River song, in that song, especially in the music video, Justin Timberlake, he uses an actress who looks very, very similar to Britney Spears in the video. So a lot of people, he kind of deliberately used the fact that they had broken up, and seems to insinuate that she had cheated on him, and that was kind of, he basically made the song to kind of
it's pretty gross.
Smear her,
he made hay out of and this is basically, he's launching his solo career. Is it not one of his first singles?
Look, that's kind of where Mars is.
Yeah, right, I know exactly. I know.
And her partner, her ex, is like digging a knife in her back. Like, this is. This was happening in this time frame. That was when the song was being released and this music video came out, and it was even worse that it was like a very popular song. I mean, it's I mean, if basically just imagine that,
it's hard enough.
Really bad breakup with this.
It's hard enough breaking up. I mean, I'm sure you and I and anyone listening has been through a breakup, and it sucks and it hurts. but we don't have like our exes
Write a
singing
hit song
a hit song.
about how much you
And
suck.
yeah,
Yeah.
uh, exactly.
Yeah,
It's
I
a whole
mean,
other. I have
a
to
whole
admit,
level of
I've had my dark nights of the soul with breakups, but it's never been quite like that. So yeah,
right.
um,
So,
pretty
yeah,
shitty.
that sucks.
And here's
So
this
then
again, but here's this
go ahead.
Jupiter again opposite her moon. Like, I think Jupiter's always like just not on her side. You know,
I
she's
don't know though. I mean, look at her Jupiter natally. Her Jupiter's in the second house. Obviously, she has done pretty well for money. She's
yes,
been very
money,
lucrative.
money that for a good chunk of her adult life she didn't have access to.
That's true. Well, and
You know, like
also
yeah,
and also I also read that Federline back in like 2018 tried to increase the child support payments from
right.
like 4,000 to like 20,000 a month. She agreed to do it, but um she suddenly had to kind of pay out the
Right.
nose, I guess, with that
There is
inflation
something
as
else in
well.
the book, though. Apparently, like when it comes to the conservatorship, though, Federline seems to have played, maybe unwittingly, but played some kind of role in the gradual unrolling of the conservatorship because he got into a fight with Brittany's father about the kids and had him banned from the house. And I think that started to sort of unravel the whole situation. That's the impression I got from the book, anyway.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, so
Um,
even if, yeah, I mean, Kevin has some redeeming role in the story in that
so
sense.
after the Venus retrograde in Capricorn that happened in at the end of 2005 into 2006, where she conceives the second child, by November 2006, she files for divorce from Kevin Federline. And she does that to kind of avoid the embarrassment of him filing against her. So on November 7th,
Right.
2006,
There she is.
she files for divorce from Kevin Federline. And of course, where's Venus? Back in Scorpio with the sun. So we can see a clear
It's a blue
connection
two
between,
again. Yeah.
yeah, Blue 2 again. So November 1998, she gets involved with Justin Timberlake at the NSYNC tour. That's Sun Venus conjunct in Capricorn. Sorry, Sun Venus conjunct in Scorpio. 4 years later, Venus retrograde in Scorpio. JT comes out with Crimea River torching her, and then 4 years after that, Sun Venus conjunct in Scorpio again, and this time she's filing for divorce from Kevin Federline, but it won't complete until August of 2007 when Venus goes retrograde in Leo. So you start stringing this together, and you're like, oh shit, like this is just this is just kind of baked into like the rhythm of the way that these relationships work. If you look 4 years on, sorry, if you go, I don't know exactly what was going on with her in 2010, but I know that in the Blue 2 of 2014, in October
Mhm.
of 2014, apparently that was when she began dating this person, Charlie Ebersole, who she was only involved with for a few months. But I thought that was still interesting that at yet another Blue 2, she's initiating, another relationship.
Right. Hold on. I'll put up that chart here. Am I still sharing the screen?
Yep, yep.
Okay. Yeah, this is her birthday in 2014, so it would have been just a little bit before this during the Blue 2 that she started
Mhm.
dating him. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is also part of her Uranus transit through the seventh house. So really after like 2010 when she gets involved with oh yeah, now I remember. I think that's when she gets involved with Jason Trewick, although he has a slightly different story that kind of tracks more with the ones. Um
The red ones?
The red ones. So yeah, in April 2009, she began dating Jason Trewick, which is
Okay.
during the red one of 2009, and then in January 2013, which is in the lead up to the blue one, which is a Sun Venus conjunction in Aries. That's when they broke up. Um,
Okay.
and
I'm trying to follow
yeah,
you.
sorry,
This is I'm going by solar returns. This is December of
yeah.
2012, just before that. Um, yeah, well, speaking of the red ones, there is this is actually when I did the talk on her in Arizona, the thing I was talking about were the red ones in her life. I'll just go through these
Mhm.
quickly. Um, three really notable red ones in her life. So Nigel Dick is a he directed videos. He directed a lot of her early music videos. He helped her shape that whole image. Hit me, baby, one more time. All that stuff.
Hmm.
He's born with Venus just about to go retrograde here in Taurus, and he's born in 1953. He's a red one. He was born a day and a half before the Venus went retrograde there. And then second up is David LaChapelle, a famous sort of fashion photographer. He's got Jupiter and Uranus on her ascendant, and he's known for having, again, like Nigel Dick, sort of helped her cultivate the image, the ingenue, getting Plutoed sort of image that she shaped in the early years of her career. And he's a red one. He's born with Venus in Aries, just about to go retrograde. How many days? Yeah, less than 7 days before that. And then her older brother, Brian Spears, is also a Venus retrograde in Aries in her seventh house. So yeah, there's this was an early observation of mine. I mean, when I was doing this work in 2007, I was still sort of shaping my research on Venus retrograde. But this was an example that I saw that there seemed to be a lot of men in her life that were red ones that had a very sort of specific impact in helping her shape her
Right.
her image.
So then in 1993,
Oh
for the
yes, and
red
then in
one,
1993, she successfully during a red one Venus transit, she successfully auditions for the Mickey Mouse Club. She had auditioned for them previously a few years earlier, but this is the one when she succeeded. And then when
yeah,
she succeeded, she goes back to her hometown and they throw a Britney Spears Day parade for her.
the
Which is, she's like what? She's 12 years old.
I think
Can't,
it's worth
can't live in
mentioning though
Louisiana.
that the first time she tried to audition for the Mickey Mouse Club was just after she had turned 8
Right,
in
right.
1990, which means that it happened in a year of
That
a
was
Venus
red
retrograde in
4.
Capricorn. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the
Yeah.
return of her natal Venus return. So even though it didn't work out in that particular year, it is interesting that that was like that was all of the biggest audition she had done up to that point, and they had to drive like 8 hours
Right.
to
And they
Atlanta
even
for this
and
audition.
it wasn't a total washout. The problem was that she was too young. They only wanted
Yeah.
kids who were older than 10, and she tried to lie about her age, and they said, "Look, you're really talented. Go to New York, find an agent, get some experience in stage shows and stuff, and then, come back and see us." And that's what she did. She went to New York, she got an agent, she did some stage shows in New York and got experience. And so that when she went back and auditioned this time, she was old enough and she had experience under her belt and they wanted her. So it
Now,
wasn't even though
yeah,
she was refused the first time, it wasn't
yeah,
like a door slammed in her face. It was like, keep working on it and come back and see us.
right. Look at that transit that happened. In that red one of 1993, you can see that Uranus and Neptune were getting up into late Capricorn, making
right.
they were getting close to making this conjunction with Venus, which is her ascendant ruler, and that would have probably been happening during the time that the Mickey Mouse Club would have been like airing. And she describes it as being this really great experience, which is basically like a boot camp for
Well,
the
yeah.
entertainment industry,
Yeah, I mean, it's
and
her, Christina Aguilera,
like
Justin
all of
Timberlake,
these like yeah, big names,
yeah,
future big
what's his
names,
name? Ryan, what's his name?
Gosling,
Gosling. Yeah, they're all
Ken, you know,
exactly.
um,
Ken himself. They're all there. They're all kids, and they're all in this show. So yeah, it really is kind of a little super group, a little sort of a snapshot in terms of
future
the future
stars.
future stars. Yeah.
And that's interesting too, because I know you've mentioned before that like the Uranus Neptune conjunction, like when it opposed Venus, like certain nativities that have Venus in Cancer, or
Mm.
when it conjoined, Venus in Capricorn, that those people ended up kind of becoming something of themselves,
Oh
in
yeah,
that.
yeah. Like Kurt Cobain's Jupiter was
Yeah.
over here in Cancer, for instance, and yeah, a lot of people who were a big deal in this the early '90s. Yeah, this conjunction of Uranus and Neptune always had a really
So it's
strong
just so
presence.
interesting that it also happened for the child Britney Spears. She just wouldn't, become kind of she wouldn't sort of live out that promise in a sense until just a bit later. But so then if we go to the Venus retrograde in Aries of 2001, so 8 years later, then we get to the uh
The
The best
movie.
movie in the world.
But
Um,
yeah, no, actually, this was really interesting. Her account of filming the movie. Sorry, I'm just
mhm.
looking for it here. Bear with me. Bear with me. No.
These are all chronological order, right?
Yeah, that's the
Okay,
problem here. So yeah,
there we go.
here's the movie, but I want to find it when she's making the movie. Wait, what's this? No, that's too soon. See,
It would be further up.
yeah, sorry.
It's gonna be right
So,
around.
so
Yeah,
sorry.
there you go. There you go. It's Britney Spears. Crossroads filming begins.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
there we are.
beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I should have
No,
I
no
should
problem.
have done this differently.
Oh, that's
So,
fine.
yeah, this is Venus retrograde in the 7th, and her account of this is really interesting. She says she got lost in the role, right? She said, like, she
Right,
was like, it was almost like method acting gone wrong, that she was so subsumed in the role that she didn't like the effect it had on her, and she sort of declined to do further movie roles because she didn't like how it sort of affected her.
right. Um, I also like that, we can see from the nodes that she would have likely had, eclipses occurring across the 10th, 4th axis. This was kind of a, medium shift, for her. She'd already, she was mostly known for doing music. This is like the first and one of the only, sort of films, she was involved in. So, um, yeah, I thought that was an interesting sort of development on that same theme, in because in 1993 she gets this audition and is accepted to be in the Mickey Mouse Club, but then this time she's like basically sort of switching up a style, I guess you could say.
Sure, she could have had more of a movie career if she'd wanted, but
Sure.
certainly this was. I mean, this is a peak. I mean, she's huge at this point.
Yeah, I
She's
mean, I
you know,
remember when
she's
it came out, it was just, yeah, she really was, like the
yeah, there's no one who's more famous than she is at this point,
right,
and she's still sort of America's sweetheart, and
right,
she's still in that honeymoon phase of her stardom.
right.
But I think this is just when things are starting to get a little weird for her, her experience in the movie and how it
Yeah,
affects her. But my God, she's 19.
yeah,
She's
right. Um,
so yeah,
so then if we go 9 years later, in April 2009, apparently this is the month that
8 years
was
later.
able to, 8 years later, yeah. This was the month that I could find that she began dating her manager, Jason Trawick. Um, so we can see Venus would have gone retrograde in the 7th house there.
Hmm.
Um, and um, there's we eventually will sort of get to the specifics of the conservatorship, because I think that's definitely worth mentioning.
Oh yeah, we
But
definitely want to talk about
yeah,
that.
but I thought it was just interesting that, yeah, 8 years later, Venus retrograde in the 7th, she begins dating her manager, which is obviously, that's maybe a difficult kind of relationship to manage, especially when by a different Venus retrograde, um uh Jason becomes her co-conservator.
Right.
That happens um that
The
happens during the Red 3 of 2012.
Okay.
April 25th, 2012 is when her fiance, at this point, he becomes legally granted this role as co-conservator.
So there
And
we are, and the previous time was when she started dating Kevin Federline, and so there's
yeah,
that Venus retrograde that goes opposite her sun, but now look at this Saturn in the
yeah,
first house, Uranus
it's
on the
like,
descendant, yeah.
yeah, this is like part of her Saturn return, and Saturn exactly square Venus. Mars is also going to be making another return to her 12th. Um,
She's 30, so she's in a 7th house perfection year, so this Uranus is really sharp
yep,
now on the descendant,
yeah.
it's yeah.
Another thing that's kind of interesting to look at is if you throw up the transits of the general natal placements of Jason Trowick. He was born December 15th, 1971.
Okay.
So this is a
Oh,
guy
okay, so
she
this is the I already know this is mega
yeah,
Sag. This is
yeah,
mega Sag.
it
I was
is.
I was in a band with a guy born a couple of days after this,
So you can
and
see why they
yeah,
get along, though. You can see why. I mean, they
sure,
were
sure.
together quite a while, but also check out where his Pluto is.
Yeah.
Um,
Lovely.
his Pluto is like right on her ascendant. This is the guy who she is with, but then he becomes like not only is her manager, which is kind of odd that you might be involved in a relationship with your manager, but then he also becomes the co-conservator alongside your father. Like he just ends up, kind of being in this position of sort of too much power over her in a sense, I would say.
Mm. Yeah.
That's kind of the
Yeah.
implication I might think of Pluto being on her ascendant. And then they break up um by they break up at some point in where is it? It's yeah, they break up in January of 2013, which is like right on the edge of the blue one.
The blue one again.
In
Right.
and so keep in mind they began dating under a red one, Venus retrograde in Aries, and then they break up on the edge of another Sun Venus conjunction in Aries of 2013. So this is something I've really been fascinated by, is that it's not just that Venus retrogrades, like the 8-year interval, it's not just that those are connected, but you even have this smaller division, the 4-year interval
Yeah.
from red to blue, or from exterior conjunction to interior conjunction, that also form these kind of units of Venus.
That's
Uh,
quite common. That's quite
yeah,
common. I mean, that, I know I talk about the retrogrades a lot, but they absolutely have this very tight relationship with their counterparts. The other 4 year, every other 4 years, there'll be a conjunction or a retrograde, exterior conjunction, interior conjunction. Those are 4 years apart. And yeah, they're absolutely linked. It's very even, symmetrical. And yeah, I see this kind of connection all the time.
so what at this point we talked a lot about like her relationships, and obviously there's like tons of interesting stuff there, but maybe let's talk about like how this conservatorship got started, and what the main reason for that is astrologically, that this would be the time it would happen.
Just happened. You there?
Yeah, I'm right here.
Okay. I think some cable got dismounted. Um, Now just bear with me here a moment, and I'll pull up that chart. Yeah. Well. Okay. So I'll share this again. I One thing that wasn't super apparent at the time, but becomes very apparent in the book, is just before the whole head shaving thing happened. Her aunt died. Her favorite aunt.
Right.
In January 2000. So this is like literally 3 weeks before she's gonna shave her head and attack paparazzi with the umbrella and all that. But
So
that's
Mars is still her ruler of the year at this point,
right, right.
which has just, well, where is it? It's on the on the IC. So she has like a family
Yeah,
member like
yeah,
us.
right. And this is along with everything else going on for her. Her aunt dies of, I think, ovarian cancer, and so she's grieving, but at the same time, good. She's just divorced Kevin. Um, a few 2 months earlier, she was hanging out with. This is something else she talks about in the book. This was a big deal at the time.
Uh,
Do you remember this?
Yeah, it does
She
make
just
sense now listening to us, talk about it. She just
yeah.
like
She
direct.
says
That's it.
in the book, she's like, you know what happened this night? I got drunk. Like big deal. People get drunk. And look, this is Jupiter making the ingress into Sagittarius right at this moment. Yeah, she goes partying with Paris Hilton and Lindsay Lohan. Lindsay Lohan is also sort of kind of coming apart around the same time, but yeah, I mean, she's just sort of blowing off steam. Her mom's at home looking after the baby, so it's not like she's neglecting her kids. She's just, she's newly divorced, or filing to divorce anyway. She's newly
She was in a
separated from
strange
her.
spot. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
and
she
she's
just
just,
needed to let loose.
she's just out for a night getting drunk with some friends, but it becomes this huge deal, like this total. And if I'm not wrong, was this not the night that like paparazzi were taking pictures of her getting out of a limo and she's not wearing underwear or something like that.
Oh,
Like it was that kind of
it was that kind.
gross.
It was that
Yeah,
era.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was that kind of. I think it was this night even.
I don't know
You
if
know.
it was the same person. I think there might have been another celebrity, but
Oh, okay. But I'm getting. But
yeah,
it was this kind of. There were definitely like it was very very public and controversial. So that happens, and then yeah, she passes out in in at a Vegas New Year's party. Like okay, like who hasn't done that? um, she yeah.
it's
So her
Sin City. Can't you
right.
sin?
Right. So her aunt dies, and then the whole sort of thing that we've covered already. She goes to rehab, and then she checks out of rehab, and she shaves her head and does all this stuff. And then jump ahead a year, and this is something else she talks about in the book. So now it's like the Blackout album has come out. She's been humiliated, like we talked about in September of 2007 when she was on the VMAs, and people are making fun of her.
That was the Venus retrograde. Yeah.
Right, during the Venus retrograde. So now it's a few months later. Mars has gone retrograde over her midheaven.
Yeah.
Mars went retrograde from Cancer to Gemini over the course of late 07, early 08. And now Jupiter's on the IC. See, Jupiter's always in this nasty place with her. Or what shouldn't would
Well, I mean,
hold on.
oh, yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I don't want to jump the gun here.
So what happens on this day is she's with her kids, and Kevin sends a staff member basically to come get the kids because it's her. They have shared custody, and but because things had gone so wrong. The older child, she gives the older child to the staff member who's going to bring him back to Kevin. But then she suddenly gets this wave of panic, fearing that she's not going to see her kids again. And she takes little Jaden and locks herself in the bathroom with her youngest, who's got, just over a year old at this point. So she's in there for a while, and she's like, I just, I want to be sure she's in a panic. She's worried that for some reason Kevin's going to take the kids away from her, or she's not going to be able to see them. And so long story short, the door gets busted down, and she gets taken to the hospital. The kids are taken from her. And this is where things really start to unravel. And it's within a month of this that the conservatorship is imposed on her in February of 2008. Have I left right with the Pluto ingress?
Yeah,
into
I mean
Capricorn?
that's really the key thing here, because she was born with that natal potential, right, of being under this stern control, right, this empowered limiting force that would come from her parents, and that was always kind of there as this possibility with Saturn and Pluto rising. But the Pluto ingress and the Pluto transit through that sign, creating that series of squares, like this was really the beginning of it. And this is why the ingresses are so important to study, because obviously the exact aspect is far, far away from happening. But this moment, of this ingress is just so pivotal, because it really tells you the chapter heading, of this part of her life, which is, the conservatorship era.
Yeah. Yeah. So with this, I mean, this is, a 13-year battle, basically. So shall we jump right ahead to the other side of this?
Sure.
Yeah. So in the book, I mean, things had sort of been building up. By the time this happens, June 22nd, 2021, she calls 911 and reports her father for conservatorship abuse. But by this point, the Free Britney movement is already happening. And there's been a documentary about it. So the hype is building up, and it's amazing. This gives her sort of like emotional courage. You know what I mean? Like it's her fans kind of saved her. Yeah, no, I mean, that's really the impression I get in the book. Her fans saved her. It was this sort of outside movement that had been growing since about 2019, when she ended her Vegas thing. And by 2 years later, she takes it to court, and within a few months it'll be struck down. So look, Saturn on her moon, square Uranus, and then this whole like Venus opposite Pluto right on her nose. And
Yeah, it's just
What
amazing astrology. Like it just
Yeah.
it's perfect. Like Venus, the ruler of the ascendant, receiving the conjunction from Pluto, and like this is when this issue comes to this just incredible head. And um it's yeah, it's really something.
But I find it interesting that, look, we saw what Jupiter on her sun was like. It was it was
Right.
terrible. Saturn on her moon is liberating, and
Although at the same on the same by the same token, though, I mean, I think that we do see Jupiter squaring um Uranus and to Mercury on that day. But um
sure.
yeah,
But I mean, come on. This is
right.
this is this is very
um
powerful. This is very
no, for
powerful.
sure.
And even just the
Was
fact
that
that
the day of her testimony? Was that the day of her, like, where she, like,
no,
actually speaks
this is
about it?
this is when she initiates the thing, and then the next
Gotcha.
day she gives testimony, and then on November 12th she's off, I think in Tahiti or something like that, and she gets a call from her lawyer saying the conservatorship has been ended, and this is November 12th, so this is a few months later. Um, yeah,
Yeah. Really, really quick, open up reports and show the Zodiacal releasing from Spirit and Sagittarius for this date, November 12th, 2021.
okay. Spirits, November 21st.
November 12th, 2021. See, that's like a multiple loosing of the bond.
Right,
of
right, right.
So she not only is she in this new Aquarius period, on level 1, but then she reaches loosing of the bond on level 3 to
Right.
Leo. Literally a
Yeah.
loosing of the bond from darkness to light. And this is after enduring this extremely long Capricorn period from 1993, the beginning of her time with the Mickey Mouse Club, all the way up to May of 2020, which encompasses, not only, you know,
Everything we've been talking about.
everything. Yeah,
Everything we've
everything.
been talking about.
Yeah,
I mean,
the entire.
she auditioned for Mickey Mouse Club in April of '93, but, the show was probably didn't start
Yeah,
broadcasting until after the
until
September of '93. So, like, her whole showbiz career is under
her
that
whole
Capricorn
showbiz
level
career was
1.
in the Capricorn period, and for that reason, I kind of wonder if her fortune might potentially be in late Cancer, because it would make like the peak period
Yeah,
of her
yeah,
international success, more located in the Capricorn period, and that this
that's right.
Aquarius period really does represent this like just next phase,
And
of her life.
And let's face it, she would only have to have been born, what, 2 minutes earlier, and she would have a Cancer lot of fortune instead of a Leo one. So I think that's a pretty good case that she's born at least 2 minutes earlier than the time we have, which already sounds like a rounded off time. And I
Right,
don't think we're stretching credulity too much by
right.
proposing this. No, but I think you're right. I think most likely it is a Cancer lot of fortune, so that
So
if you
that
do it for this
Yeah,
chart,
so
then
the
suddenly,
Capricorn
so
ends up
this
being
becomes
that.
the peak period. Yeah.
Yeah, which would make sense. I mean, she literally reached, such a colossal height, in this time. Well, another thing to keep in mind is, one of her worst periods would probably be Virgo, because that's where she has a Mars in the 12th house. Look where it falls. July
Right.
24th, 2006 through March 15th, 2008. That was
Literally the shit
literally the
show. The shit
lowest,
show. Yeah. Yeah.
that it would get. So that's there's some interesting things. There's some, if you poke around in there's some interesting things. But
So she needs to watch out in 2030. Brittany, if you're watching, stay home in
right,
20 from 2030 to 2032. We're trying to look out for you here. We're
right,
trying to do
right.
right by you, and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's a lot more you can say about that. So many directions you can go. But I thought that
Oh, that's really good.
yeah, that sort of shows. I think that, I mean, that's like very, very simple, but still very, very compelling. That yeah, the conservatorship really kind of began with Venus's ingress into the sign, and that it kind of ended once it basically reached this conjunction with a Venus. But that's not all that was going on with Venus, was it, Nick? What else was going on with Venus at this time?
Venus was getting ready to go retrograde.
Yeah.
This is basically, by this point, if we look at the Yeah, this is 36 days before Venus goes retrograde at 26 Capricorn, basically conjunct tornadal Venus.
Yeah,
There would be a Venus retrograde station conjunct Pluto
right.
in just over a month later. So we're back in the red four, basically.
Well,
So her,
and you have this wave of goodwill for her, right? This is her, like,
yeah,
she is now again, like in the good
yeah,
favor, and not just the good favor, but also the sympathies, of the public. I mean, they were going to have like hearings in Congress and stuff about conservatorships, and
yeah,
looking into all of these different cases, because if someone like Britney Spears can be, it trapped in this way, how many more people who don't have her resources or her fame and a legion of supporters, how many other people might be stuck in a similar situation where they've been kind of, written out of having any control of their lives. So it's really, really powerful, I think, that she was coming into like this new Venus era, this new consensus was formed basically around,
right, right.
her status. I mean, it seemed to be pretty. I mean, that was even bipartisan, in Congress, to sort of look into this.
And nothing is bipartisan in Congress
Right,
these
right.
days.
Yeah, so, I mean, Britney Spears' freedom, became
Yeah.
a kind of bipartisan, thing,
It's interesting when
with
just
Venus.
to go back to that Mars in the 12th. She talks about the years of the conservatorship, where she's playing along, but she's playing along just so she can be close to her kids, but she knows all along that, she's being mistreated. And it's kind of like the prisoner who gradually digs a hole with a spoon in their cell and plays nice with the guards while they continue to like sort of dig the hole to get themselves the tunnel to escape from the cell. um the Mars in the 12th is capable of that sort of covert action. And I mean, this is not a criticism. This was a sort of a measure of self-defense, but
Right.
that's a testimony to how the Mars in the 12th, when it's in the sect in favor, can work out for the individuals on the individual side. Is that she had the wherewithal to sort of play nice with her parents, play nice with her dad, act like she's cooperating, until such moment that she could sort of take advantage of the situation and get out of all of this.
Right, well, there's even that quote from the book where she says something like, I gave up my freedom basically,
Right.
for my children. I thought that was another interesting statement to make, given that the ruler of the fifth house of children in her chart is that contrary to malefic Saturn, and so she was someone who was sort of kept from her children, had all these barriers with her children, and
But at
it's
the end
very
of the day, the sect light is a fifth house moon. So like it's
right.
all about her kids. I mean,
Yeah,
it's, a lot of women would, testify to this kind of thing, even if they didn't have the sect light in the fifth house. But it's all the more poignant. You can just see that like pop stardom means nothing. Nothing means anything without the kids,
right. I also think it's relevant too that the moon is the ruler of her 10th house, because
Mm,
this is another way that her chart kind of supports the idea that her career would be something that involves like uh creative pursuits and
mhm.
the
Yeah.
creative arts, and that it would be very kind of youth oriented, in some respect, to the
And there
entertainment
is,
industry very
there,
generally.
there is a sun moon sextile. And so when you think about how the fifth house, 11th house axis is so important for this kind of relationship. I mean, her fans saved her,
Right.
her people, her posse, if you will, saved her. So, I mean, this is a testimony to, despite everything, the kind of support that she does have. And why this axis in her
One might
chart
one might
is
say
very
her
healthy.
spears,
Yeah, right. Spear
her
bearer.
spear bearers.
Yeah.
Um,
But yeah, no, this is like this. While some of the other axes in her chart might not be as healthy, for instance, the Mercury Jupiter axis, I think the Sun Moon axis is quite strong. So like the Cancer Leo 10th to the 11th is a pretty smooth relationship, and yeah, the 11th fifth axis is really solid for her.
Yeah. Now you were speaking about a little earlier about the Saturn on her moon, and I just wanted to point out that one of the other big reasons why some of her relationships didn't work out is because they weren't able to come to an agreement about having children. She really wanted to have more children, but some of the
Hmm.
men she was involved with, like, were kind of on the fence, or maybe realized that maybe they didn't want to have children. And so, what's interesting about that is if you go to 2022, I think you have
Yeah,
this in your file.
I do. I do.
Um,
Yeah,
you know,
she did get pregnant again, but unfortunately, she miscarried.
yeah, so it's kind of unfortunate that yeah, she has the contrary to sect malefic Saturn going through the fifth house, and she has this unfortunate experience of losing a child by miscarriage, one that she really wanted to have. And it's also interesting to note as well that this pregnancy was announced like back in April. It's not clear how long she had actually been pregnant for, but I imagine that the months previous to this, she must have been maybe trying to have this child
It
with
it usually
Mary.
happens in the yeah, it usually happens in the first trimester. So
Yeah.
we can
So,
assume it was like February or something that
well,
the child was
so the
conceived.
reason this is important is because this is sort of the tail end of that Venus retrograde in Capricorn, the same one in which she, gets liberated from the conservatorship. Also, note that Jupiter had just ingressed into Aries, and
Yeah.
later that year, she
She
does get married to the guy.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Unfortunately, it didn't last. The marriage only lasted a year, just a
it
little over
ended
a year.
in August of 2023, which is
A red 5 Venus retrograde in Leo, yeah.
yeah. I mean,
I know,
yeah,
and here
okay.
we go again, yeah.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what the pattern was to each of these retrogrades. The Scorpio ones seem to be like the Scorpio Sun Venus alignments. The blue and red twos seem to be almost exclusively about like relationship problems, right? It's
Yeah.
about
The
um,
Crimea River,
Crimea River.
Getting involved with Justin in '98, Crimea River in 2002, divorcing Kevin and
Yeah,
getting drunk in 2006.
yeah,
And then
it's
in 2018, actually 2018, during that retrograde, I don't have it in the file, but her father her father had a burst colon, and that led
oh,
to her ending.
I, I thought that was at the beginning of 2020.
It's at the beginning of 2019, so
Oh,
it's still in the red too. It's still in
mhm,
the red too, in
gotcha.
January of 2019, and that's when she ends her Vegas residency, because her dad was full of shit.
Ah,
He didn't bring-
okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry.
Gotcha. All
Um,
right.
yeah, but yeah, the red two plays into that. But sorry, yes, you're on the thread of the different Venus retrogrades and what they seem to what themes they seem to evoke in her life.
Right. Because if we well, and this is something that is a bit of that can be a bit disconcerting, I think, when you are studying the cycles this way, which is that what happens during a Venus retrograde doesn't necessarily always neatly correspond to the house that it happens in. Like
No,
it does sometimes. Sometimes it is very on point for that house, but it's not always related to that house. It's like Venus kind of has its own
yeah.
meaning, independent of the kind of cultural horoscopic astrology we kind of know and love.
Well,
It's sort of
some of
it's sort of on top of it, kind of.
yeah, some
Or
of that comes down to the perfection cycle,
yeah,
because this is when you really start to look at the Venus cycle paired with the perfection cycle. The perfection cycle is 12 years. The Venus cycle is 8 years. So, for instance, let's just go to let's see what should I start with. Let's start with the excuse me with the Mickey Mouse audition.
mhm.
All right, so this is the red one Venus in Aries, and at this point she's what? She's 11 years old. Am I right? Yes,
You
she's
are
11 years old.
correct. Yeah,
Okay, so 11 years old is a 12th house perfection year. So we know she's in a Virgo perfection year when this Venus retrograde goes when this Venus goes retrograde in Aries. So we know that red one Venus retrogrades in Aries are always going to be in an earth sign perfection year because they're 8
right.
years apart, and so it's always going to be. So we know if in 93 here she's in the Virgo perfection year, 8 years later, when she's making crossroads, she's going to be in the Taurus perfection year, which of course suddenly makes Venus the Lord of the year, right?
Right.
And then 8 years later, in 2009, when she gets involved with her manager, she's in the Capricorn perfection year, which is the sign she has natal Venus in. Okay. And then in 2017, it'll be Virgo again. And then, hey, next year in 2025, she's going to be in another one of these Taurus perfection years
Where Venus is going retrograde, and yeah,
in
so
Aries. So there is something to following. Yeah, because you don't always get Venus retrograde presents a pattern of sorts, but it's not always sort of thematically consistent. It's not always the same area of life. But you can be sure that if you see a given Venus retrograde being, having a really prominent sort of placement transit wise in the person's life, you know that you can follow that perfection cycle and get into the sort of the next level of interpretation.
right. I would also imagine if it, hits not just a particular house, but a particular planet in your chart, that might provide a little more consistency across the
Yes.
the the interpretation of Venus retrograde. Although that also implies that at certain points in your life, that particular transit it makes will be worse or better, depending whether it's moving away or toward a benefic or malefic in your chart.
Right.
Um, but Yeah, yeah, that's very fascinating that yeah, she'll be kind of at another one of these Venus retrograde periods in a seventh, while Taurus is the perfected sign.
Yeah.
Is that
So
good?
Venus will be the Lord of the year. Yeah. And
Yeah.
that'll be the first one since 2001 when she was making Crossroads.
So well, and we know from her Zodiacal releasing from Spirit that she's kind of in a brand new
Yeah.
era, as of
Yeah.
March 2020. So now that she's kind of out of this conservatorship, that um, I wouldn't necessarily assume it's music. If
No, I mean,
it's
she
like
says she's
Crossroads, it might be another film.
well, she says in the book that she's not sure she can go back to performing. She wants to love it. She wants to sing just for the
Yeah.
love of it, and not have everything be some big Vegas production. Um, Look, she's in this Aquarius level 1 period now. That's her fifth house. That's her moon. So maybe she just makes records, at
She becomes
in
a
a
studio musician.
exactly like,
Yeah.
just like, sets up a little studio and makes, maybe even makes music with her sons or something like
Yeah.
that.
Who knows?
Yeah, but not trying to sort of recapture the spotlight, but be an
Right.
artist, just be an artist in her own right. And again, I mean, what an amazing that was the thing that really struck me about the book is just like the role that her fans played. That's a whole other level of the relationship between a megastar and their audience is I mean, I think the case can be made that they really saved her. They without her fans, she might still be in that situation.
Yeah. That's yeah, that is really interesting.
Yeah, by the by the
Figuring
time
out
she
the word.
by the time she reports the abuse on her, by the time she sort of is proactive in extricating herself from that situation, and that Venus Pluto opposition is just crazy. These transits
You're
are
right.
amazing. But by this point, like it's been going for over 2 years that people have been saying, free Britney and all this stuff. So it,
Right.
it really sort of built up. She needed that support.
Right. Um the well, and I also just think that's such a an amazing slogan as well, given like the Saturn Pluto conjunction in the first house. And this is someone who would need freeing. This is
Yeah.
someone who is really kind of burdened by this yeah, these high standards, or these stately. It's like
Right.
being in a prison that is like a luxury villa.
Yeah. Yeah. Look,
uh,
I mean, yeah, some people lose their freedom and they don't get to eat, good food or live in a nice place in Thousand Oaks or whatever. I mean, she had some amount of comfort despite her circumstances. But at the same time, yeah, I think she was held to a very different standard than most other people are. It was absolutely like a sort of a double standard in terms of how she was treated. Yeah, like you said, she's performing in Vegas and she's not even allowed to sin in Sin
Yeah.
City.
I was
Um,
also really struck by that one sentence that she wrote where she said something like, I didn't know that I signed some invisible agreement to stay 17 forever."
right,
Um, you
right.
know, which, fair point. You know,
Yep. Yep.
um, and that was in response to, people who, made all these unfair comments about her appearance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, so the comments have
Okay.
popped
Yeah. Let's.
off. There's a lot of
Oh.
things going on in there.
Okay. Let's take a look here.
So Laura's saying that there are concerns that she's still trapped, but at least she got away from her father. Um,
The woman that
how
helped
is she
trap
still
him.
trapped? She agreed to continue treatment, in quotes, is allowing one of the conservatorship team to continue working with her to get out and away from the original team. I haven't heard of that. I thought I was under the impression that it was all over. Um, but yeah, I don't know about that.
Okay. Fortune Amu says it was Brittany who was photographed getting out of the car without her
Oh,
underwear.
okay,
I thought so. I'm not that I needed to be right about that, but yeah,
right.
I remember that was part of that whole thing was
The
she went out
official
without her.
conservatorship is over, according to Laura. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know about the Sam Lufty thing. I mean, we didn't get through. We didn't get
Yeah,
into
I
every
don't remember her
relationship.
mentioning Sam
Um,
Lutfi in the book. Maybe she did, but I don't remember it. Um, there
um,
is like there's another relationship around the time that things were unraveling. She was dating a photographer who she doesn't name in the book. She just calls him the photographer. But in my files, his name is Isaac something. I have him Isaac Cohen.
I gotta
Um,
say, a pop star being with a photographer from the paparazzi is kind of like, you know, um,
yeah,
fraternizing with the enemy.
the
Well,
cat's
and
among
that's
the cat's
the
among the
ruler.
pigeons. The
The
cat's
ruler
among
of
the
the
pigeons.
seventh is in the 12th.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting.
So yeah, okay. I mean, I I get the impression she's largely free. I mean, she is still. I mean, stardom of that level is also a trap in itself. Even though obviously she's got quite the devoted following.
But she also talks in the book about how she's also seen, like, well, also, I think anyone could say she's seen like the dark side of fame, and that she doesn't seem to want to you know
Yeah, I
be
just
a part of that.
yeah I just did a search here. I'll show you guys for a second. I have the Kindle version of the book, and I did a search for Lufty, and there's no mention. So she literally doesn't mention Sam Lufty. So yeah, whatever part of that story comes into here, she didn't consider it to be important enough to include in her book.
um yeah.
All right. Well, does anyone have any further questions? I think I'm.
Yeah, I mean, there's other things we could get into, but I mean, I feel like that kind of, tells some of the large part of the story. I mean,
Yeah.
um,
Like I said, it would have been interesting. I don't know much about this Vegas period of hers, and I think it's something I'll look into. I didn't have time as it was to look into it this
yeah,
time.
and we also didn't get to talk too much about her, like,
Her
professional,
actual music. Yeah, yeah. I
right?
wanted it would have been
Um,
good to do that. Although, I'm not a like a big listener of her music. I know, some of the hit
right.
singles. I was unaware of some of her later albums. I think that was one revelation you and I were talking before we recorded. She seems to have a really high regard for this album Blackout that she did right in the middle of all the craziness, that she thinks it's her best. And she's especially touched when fans of hers, singled that album out as a big favorite. So I found that interesting.
Yeah, it
And
was just interesting hearing it directly from her, like
yeah,
what she thought of.
how she sees her music. Yeah.
Right, and it's
Yeah.
funny because as I was reading the book, I'd sometimes go to the song she was talking about, like go to the video she was talking about. Like she said in the book that she really hated the way that the Gimme More video came out. I mean, that it was like really low budget and that it just said it came out terrible. I never thought that ever about that video. um I mean, I wasn't like watching it a ton, but I just never had that impression. So it's really interesting seeing the difference in the way the artists themselves, see these things.
Laura seems to be a really knowledgeable fan here. This is really helpful input. Thank you, Laura. She says she was actually working on what's widely regarded as the pop Bible, Blackout, leading up to this the conservatorship era. I didn't know that. See, I'm too
Mhm.
I'm as old as dirt, and it's beyond me. Yeah, but that's interesting. The pop Bible, Blackout's the pop Bible. How about that? That's not what she calls it. I mean,
I'm
she's
just I mean, I'm just surprised that she ended up working with Pharrell because he worked with Justin Timberlake as well. And I don't know if like he just kind of um said, I'm only working with you, without, I don't care about your issue with each other. I just want to work with you. But
yeah.
um
I wouldn't know too
imagine
much
in
about
the
that either way.
industry, I imagine you bump shoulders with a lot of people who, have complicated histories and, you navigate through that the way you do. But um, yeah,
Yeah, well, I definitely I want to say, for those of you who are big Britney fans, like Laura clearly is, and whoever else is listening, I hope we've done justice. I am from standing from the outside, I'm looking at her life as an astrologer, not as a big Britney stan. But like I said, I wanted to do right by her, and it took the publication of this memoir to sort of justify doing this episode. So yeah, I hope we've done her justice and done right by her. And okay, B Havens might hit the thumbs up. All right, cool. That'd be nice. That'd be nice.
I mean, oh yeah, I mean, when I think of Britney Spears, I just think of like my, young teenage years. I think of my tweenage years.
Right.
That I think of like all the school dances. I remember like when I was living in Germany in like 1998, 1999, like she was just so huge. I mean, it was all of them. It was like Britney Spears, NSYNC, Destiny's Child. That was just like Backstreet Boys. That was just the sort of nonstop soundtrack at
Right.
parties and stuff.
I was already
Yeah,
30. I was in New York studying astrology with the
yeah.
NCGR.
I mean, like my
Um,
mom was obsessed with Britney Spears. Like,
okay.
in fact, she like wanted she was like obsessed with the first Britney Spears album. So like, I actually got that for her birthday, like the year or so after it came out. Um,
So
oh,
yeah,
getting some more information from Stephanie King, who says Justin wanted to work with Jay Dilla instead of Pharrell. Learned that in the Dilla biography. Huh. Okay, that's Dilla
Dilla
turned
turned him
down.
down. Oh
um,
dear. Oh
but
dear.
that worked out well though for Justin Timberlake. His collaborations with Pharrell helped him a lot.
Bliss to be is asking if we can do Elon Musk next. At some point we'll do
Uh,
Elon, but I don't want to do him next.
yeah, I guess.
Yeah. I that's still a work in progress. There
I
is
feel like
this new biography. I
that
just bought a
story is
copy.
developing.
I just bought a copy of the new biography by Walter Isaacson for my stepson, who's an engineer, and so I thought he'd read the other biography. But yeah, I was sort of too old for this kind of thing, and
Right.
my taste of music was never sort of
Well, yeah, that's
teen.
it's like
Even when
yeah,
I was a teenager, I was listening to like music that was not pop.
right.
So it was never going to be for me.
Right. Oh
But
no, of course not.
yeah,
It was really that Neptune, Uranus, co-presence in Aquarius music. That was really that. I feel like that combination that explains a lot about this sort of purely studio-driven compositions from that time. Purely digital, purely synthetic. Sort of instrumentation for these pop songs, and I mean, yeah, it's very very high quality kind of bubble gum, mainstream pop. Really, it's Britney really was like the peak of that
Yeah.
style.
For sure. So yeah, Bliss 2B says, I'm reading the Walter Isaacson book on Musk, and there are a lot of interesting events that would be good to view through an astrological lens. Yeah, like I said, I just bought that book for my stepson. I plan on reading it at some point, but it'll be in the future. I mean, I'm sure at some point we'll be interested in talking about Elon, but maybe not just yet. Laura said she'd love to do she'd love to see a Rammstein episode, and now that's more up my alley. I do have a Rammstein file, and I've been following them. That's what I was listening to. I mean, when Britney was big in the late 90s, that's exactly who I was listening to. So that is kind of more, yeah, more up my alley. I'm more of a hard rock guy. General Sherman, no birth time. Yeah, well, I mean, I do a lot of Civil War stuff where Sherman could be worked in. I've read biographies of a number of Civil War generals, so that is something that we could talk about. But that's an interesting suggestion. Laura was listening to Britney and Rammstein. Well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean
They do come from the same era. I mean,
that Venn diagram
was, yeah.
is there's a small overlap.
I respect that. I respect that. The Rammstein guys are wild. Like a number of them have had a child with the same woman.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and
I only know the music a little bit.
I mean, the music's great, but they've got a weird. I also went in South Africa. I met a woman who's a set designer for music videos, and she did a set design for Rammstein. They filmed one of their videos there. And her stories of their antics are really interesting. Like they are kind of really tightly knit and sort of do everything together. There's 6 guys, although there is a falling out lately with the singer. The singer seems to sort of distance himself from the rest of the band. So they would be interesting to investigate. They're born in Germany, so we should be able to get their birth times, but I don't have them yet. But it would be great. I mean, I'd love to look at entire bands and the synastry, and that's if we could get birth times for all 6 guys and do a whole sort of deep dive of Rammstein, that would be fun. There are other bands that would do that. You see, Laura knows all this. Yeah, Richard is the father of Till's daughter. She has Till's her name, but she's Richard's. Yeah, but also the 2 guitarists, like Richard and Paul, I'm sure at least have had children with the same woman, and yeah, it gets really interesting.
Yeah, we might need to have a third person on here who's a similar level of expertise on that. But I don't know anything about Rammstein beyond the fact that they.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, we have a lot of topics we already want to cover. I love that people are chirping in. Of course, if you're patrons and support us, then you have your input is a little more weighty, shall we say? That you have a little more to say in what we
maybe we can put up a poll or something, or suggestion box.
Yeah, or Patreon goals. Like if we hit this many subscribers or whatever, we do something that involves a little more work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't want to sort of send you off to learn the entire corpus of Rammstein.
Right. Another thought I had is that we may even be able to tackle not just a particular person's chart, but even like a particular topic, and talking about charts where maybe there's like a unique experience that people have that we have chart data for people who've gone through that.
There are a lot of things we can do. Like we said, we want to do film directors, film actors. People like General Sherman. Definitely, I'm not against doing that. Excuse me. We want to make it really varied. We want to cover a lot of territory, and yes, in the same way that we've gone from Napoleon to Brittany, we're not sure who we're doing next, but it's not going to be, Justin or Christina Aguilera or someone. It's going to be someone
Yeah,
from a
yeah.
totally different sort of
Um,
field and era.
right.
We're doing our movie thing next Saturday. Although we haven't decided on the movie, we're going to take a poll, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, make some proposals and decide on what we're doing. And when we're watching the movie, we'll be chatting about the movie, and probably chatting about the charts of the actors, of the director, or, the
Yeah.
transits of when the movie was filmed and things like that. So it'll be sort of informal.
Yeah, the way
Uh,
the way it will actually work for the live chat is the one the one unfortunate requirement we have for it is that you have an Amazon Prime subscription, because they have the watch party feature that will allow us to just give you a link over Patreon, which will allow you to join the live chat, and you can actually see the live chat on the TV next to um, whatever film we're watching, or you can just have it on your phone and have the whole screen on your TV to watch the film. So we'll be kind of chatting informally over live stream like that, over like the live chat, and then after the movie's over, there'll be another link in Patreon to link to a Zoom like hangout where we can kind of talk, more yeah, socially.
yeah,
So um
I'm seeing other good. Like Laura's saying The Godfather. Yeah, definitely. Francis Ford Coppola is absolutely like pretty much the top of my list of directors whose charts I'd love to talk about. Not just The Godfather, although I have a pretty good breakdown of the filming of that movie in my database. Um, Malcolm X, definitely. I've got a good collection of charts on him. We could
yeah.
definitely do Malcolm X. Definitely would love to do Malcolm X. He's on the list. I've been studying him forever.
Yeah,
Canadian history. There's certainly a lot I could say about that. I know it's not necessarily Patrick's strength, but we could
I
we
can
could
bone
cover
up.
facets. You could bone up. Yeah, it might be interesting to do Justin's dad, Pierre Trudeau, for instance. He's a really interesting guy. Scorsese definitely is on the list. De Palma's
Yeah,
on the list. All those sort of, even Lucas and Spielberg, although I'm not as much of a fan of theirs as I am of, say, Scorsese, Coppola, and De Palma. That whole
Kubrick.
gang. Kubrick certainly. But we should try and get his birth time. You and I have
Yeah,
talked
that's
about doing
true.
that.
Yeah,
That's
we
something we
yeah
want
we
to do.
might actually be able to do that
Yeah,
potentially.
he's now old enough that we could try and get Kubrick's birth time, which would be great, and then I would love to do Kubrick. Um, the zodiacal archetypes and casting. Okay,
uh,
what, him and the ball? I
yeah,
never even saw
Wilson
that
the
movie.
Bull. I feel like
I,
it's a 12th house movie. It's
sure,
about a
yeah.
guy who's stranded and goes a little out of his mind while he's there. But
I'm loving these suggestions that are coming up. Behaven's last suggestion, the 40 years before World War One, is extremely interesting. Yeah, the La Belle Époque, as they call it. There's all kinds of things we could cover, and we invite suggestions, and yeah, we want to include a lot of variety. Um, Leary, yeah, Timothy Leary. I've got a file on him. Definitely someone else we can do. Um, so yeah, stay tuned. If you're not
yeah,
subscribed,
well,
please subscribe. And if you really want input in terms of guiding us for episode choices, please do become a patron, because we will listen a little more to patrons than we do to freeloaders. You're welcome to be a freeloader,
yeah,
but we
no, we
will,
love freeloaders. Just
yeah, we love the
free,
freeloaders. We love the
we love the
freeloaders,
Patreon
but we're
supporters just a little
just a
bit
little
more.
bit more. um, all right, cool. Well, are we good? I mean,
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I don't feel like I left something huge on the table or anything.
yeah.
Um,
It was less organized than our Napoleon program. Some of that is I have been sick and sleeping all week. I kind of dropped the ball in terms of how much research I could have done. Thankfully, I had all the research I did 20 years
right,
ago that
and
served us very well. But
yeah,
we were less boned up on more recent facets of Brittany's history that maybe if we had done things a little more thoroughly, we could have included. But yeah, we did read the book, or at least I did. You read most of
I
it.
read most of it. I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
I did keep
Chapter 42 is most of it. I think it goes to chapter 49, so you didn't miss too
yeah,
much.
I
Um,
just yeah, I
yeah,
got up to
but it's
that point.
I highly recommend the book. I read a lot of memoirs, so
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily easily impressed.
Yeah.
But this is a
I know a
really,
lot of like
really good book.
trivia, and in some ways I hate it, but it's becomes useful.
It does.
But if I mean, I don't often, well, especially these days, I'm not necessarily on CNN so much, but on CNN, on CNN.com, you can find a real news story about something real, and then just like right below it is something about Kim Kardashian, and then I end up I end up having all of this just extraneous data about people whose lives I don't have a particular care to know much about, but it ends up becoming useful
No, it
in
does.
the
It
event I
does.
end up sort of studying those people. So like, yeah, there are a few of the things that have happened with Brittany like in the last couple of years since she's been in the news more that I sort of absorbed somehow. But in
I'm pretty
any
good at turning
case,
that. As I've gotten older, like I said, and Brittany was instrumental in sort of
mm,
shifting me from being a pop culture astrologer to being more of a historian, political historian, astrologer.
mm,
Um, because it's easier. It's easier to like, rifle through Winston Churchill's underwear drawer as opposed to Britney's. You know what I mean? Like she's still living her life. She's still, uh, um, you
telling
know,
her story,
telling
yeah.
her story exactly. So I do prefer to work with people who are either dead or very old. We could do. I wouldn't mind doing Bob Dylan at some point.
Well, speaking of dead people for whom we have time charts, what about Henry Kissinger?
Yeah, well, I would do him with Nixon because
Right.
as you know, Nixon is one of my
Also dead.
yeah, is also dead, but um, Nixon is one of my favorite astrological studies. Not a fan. Don't need to be
Right.
a fan. No, no, not
Oh
a fan.
yeah,
But
obvious.
but
Not
yeah,
yeah.
but love his chart. Love his astrology. There's a lot to do there. My Nixon file is huge. You've got all these other personalities. So yeah, to throw Kissinger in with the Nixon episode would be great.
Hmm.
All
Wonder if
right.
any wonder what people think about that.
About what?
Doing like a Nixon Kissinger
Yeah.
episode.
Well, they should. It can't just be. This is something I advise. You don't just want to study the charts of people you love. Like
Obviously, yeah.
it's fine. I mean, when I got involved in astrology, sure, I'm a big Beatles fan, so I studied the Beatles. John
Yeah.
Coltrane. I was studying his life really early on, but eventually I started to think like this is really limiting. And it's also you're going to have a bias towards the people that you're really sort of rooting for, and so I deliberately sought out charts of people who I actually have contempt for. And but
Oh no, they
yeah,
can teach you a lot. Yeah.
yeah, you can learn a lot. So that's why some of my favorite charts to study are Richard Nixon or Kaiser Wilhelm, Hitler. They're
Right.
great charts to study. And
Although we already did Napoleon, so
yeah,
maybe
we're not
we
going to
need
go.
to
Yeah, we're
find
not going to go into
a
those
different.
guys just yet. But my point being that some of my favorites are those
Mhm.
sort of contemptible types.
Yeah.
So yeah. And I hope our audience will feel the same way that it's not just like if it's not someone that you're particularly a fan of or interested in, that to think that you can't learn something from their astrology.
Right.
All right. Well, I guess we're out of steam here, Watson. Who are
Yeah.
you?
I'm Patrick Watson. I'm an astrologer, and you can find out information about me and my services at patrickwatsonAstrology.com. And um, you can also find me on most social media sites as at pwatsonastro.
Fantastic. And I am Nick Dagan Best. You can find me at nickdaganbestastrologer.com. And I'm available for all your astrological services. I do electionals, I do rectifications, I talk about synodic cycles. Some people just book sessions with me to talk about the Venus cycles in their lives, the Mars cycles in their lives. Excuse me. I drank water too fast.
Oh yeah, no problem.
And yeah, so nickdaganbestastrologer.com. And we will be back again. Become a patron, and you can participate in this Saturday's movie night. Otherwise, we'll be back next Sunday. We're not sure who we're covering on Sunday, but we're going to work all of that out.
Yeah.
And so stay tuned. Thank you for joining us. And that's it for now. Have a great week, guys.
See ya.